Section 1, mastering your local market. Now, let's start this section by acknowledging that adjusting prices around local demand patterns can be everything from frustrating to confusing to intimidating, right? However, the thing to keep in mind is as soon as you list a property online, you are doing revenue management. And thanks to software like Wheelhouse, it's now just as easy to set kind of a more complicated strategy that will capture more revenue than it is to leave a really simple solution out there. So let's start this section by looking at some of the more simple strategies that we see that are leaving some revenue on the table. Now, the first strategy that we often see is a strategy that I just describe as a strategy of simplicity, right? This is when a host or an owner or an operator decides to have the same price every single night of the year. Now, while it's very easy to describe this pricing strategy to your guests, it's definitively leaving revenue on the table. Now, slightly more advanced is a seasonal strategy. So seasonal strategy often says there's a low time or a high time in your market, and you price those seasons differently, right? So low season, obviously low price. Another strategy we see that involves kind of two prices is the weekday weekend strategy. So usually we see a weekend where prices will be increased, and during the weekdays, prices are lower. But it's, again, the same price for all those weekends and weekdays throughout the whole year. And lastly, another strategy that we often see is a big event or holiday strategy. And this is where people have essentially the same price throughout the entire year. However, they know there are a few big events or a few big holidays near them, and they raise their prices by some amount during that big event or holiday. Well, there's actually some good news and some good learnings in what we just saw, because truly every market has three key demand drivers, and they are seasonality, right? Just like we saw. So seasonality is a true demand curve. It's the most predictable. It's the most reliable. It impacts your whole market, right? So think about most people arrive in a destination at roughly the same time of year. It's usually tied to weather, right? So if you're at a hot or cold destination where there's going to be snow, people are going to arrive at about the same time of year. So that's why it's so predictable, so reliable, and it's big enough to impact the whole market. Now, that second pattern we saw, remember the weekday weekend strategy? Well, truly there is a local demand signal or local demand pattern around day of week. And the way to think about this is, when are people arriving in your market on a weekly basis? Do they show up on Thursday because they want to stay for a long 3-day weekend? Do they show up on Monday to work through the week? Maybe that signal has evolved recently, but it's really important to understand that day of week pattern when people are arriving in town. And lastly, just like we saw in that prior section, the last big demand driver are local events and holidays, right? So if you're pricing these differently, you're on the right track. But the challenge with local events is they're the most unpredictable. They're the most variable, and they have the broadest range of impacts, right? So we see times when small concerts or weddings even can impact kind of a small neighborhood or a microhood, whereas you can also have big events or festivals, holidays, etc., that literally impact the whole market. So the size and the scale of the event is really difficult to predict. Now, while we have those three demand drivers, the important thing to realize is that when combined, those demand drivers usually add up to a chart that looks something like this. And you might be asking, why is this important, right? Why should I care about this? And the answer is actually relatively simple to visualize, right? So let's just pretend that this was your current pricing strategy and that this chart that's now being overlaid is your actual demand. Well, this dark shaded area is representative of your revenue opportunity, right? Based on local demand patterns, you can increase your rates when demand is truly high, and you probably actually want to decrease your rates when demand is really low just to capture more bookings. But both of those strategies, when done correctly, will help you increase your revenue dramatically. Which leads us to our first skill today. So the first skill that we're going to learn is something called being a demand detective, right? So we define this as the ability to understand your market's seasonality, day of week, and local event demand signals so that you can price your listings more accurately and earn up to 20% more revenue. Now, here's how we're going to go about learning how to be a demand detective. In each of these next three slides, we're going to look at how you can use your market report, your free market report on Wheelhouse, to learn more about your market or more about your inventory type. And then we're going to take those lessons, and in less than a minute, we're going to go apply them to our listings, okay? So let's watch this first video, which will teach us quickly how to understand our market's seasonal demand pattern.
There are a number of ways on Wheelhouse to figure out your market's seasonality curve and to make adjustments as needed. So first, where you can quickly see market occupancy and other things on your overview tab, a more helpful page is on trends. So here we're going to go look, and we're going to look at kind of the overall occupancy and change over time. Now you can filter by a whole bunch of settings here, but once you've figured out generally what your seasonality curve looks like, let's click into one of our properties. We're going to go to our settings page, and we're actually going to click on seasonality adjustments. Here you can see that Wheelhouse is already making adjustments to your monthly base price depending on seasonality for your market. But if you ever disagree with any of our recommendations or want to change anything, it's really easy. You can actually come in and on each month, make any adjustments as you see fit. We're going to save those changes, and now we're on our way.
Great. So again, we're going to look at this pattern quite often, but we're going to learn on our free market reports. We click into our settings. We can see that Wheelhouse is already adjusting around our seasonal demand curve, but we can override those changes in any number of ways. Okay, so that was seasonal demand curve number one. Now, demand curve number two, day of week, right? So let's again, we're going to go to the market report, we're going to learn some things, and we're going to go make adjustments on our listings.
If we want to figure out our day of week demand curve for our market, again, we're going to be starting at our free market review page on the overview tab. We're going to scroll down, and we're going to look for day of week, and we're going to look for occupancy changes over time or the price factor changes over time. Once we have a sense of our market curve, and again, you can filter all this information by performance type, by bedrooms, etc. But once we figured out for our property what we want to do, we're going to go back to our settings page for a particular listing. We're going to click to weekends. And if we want to make, we can either take our Wheelhouse's recommendation of more conservative, recommended, or aggressive, or we can come in and fully customize our reaction. So in this case, let's say we want to take more risk on weekends and we want to increase our price recommendations by 20% on the weekends. All we need to do is customize it, push save, and again, we're on our way.
Great. So there's a second concept we're introducing you to there, which is when you do find a local demand signal, you can either take Wheelhouse's recommended approach, a more conservative, more aggressive approach, or fully customize it. And you can do that for every setting we're going to see today, right? So pretty powerful. Mostly you should know that you're always in control. And lastly, we talked about the import of big events. So there's a number of ways to see events on Wheelhouse. Let's watch this video quickly and we'll just see one of those ways.
Wheelhouse makes it easy to see and adjust around local events near any listing. In this case, we're going to start on our dashboard. We're going to click into an individual property like this. Now, we'll see our calendar, which includes prices, and we'll see these pink flags on any day as well. If we scroll to a day with a pink flag and click on that day, we can see the actual local event near us. In this case, it's President's Day on February 15th. Now, we might want to set a custom rate for this weekend, even though Wheelhouse will already be adjusting around local demand. Let's do that by selecting a number of days. And then we can either set an automated rate, which will increase Wheelhouse's recommendation by a certain amount, let's say 20%, but still dynamically adjust prices. Or we can fully customize the rate. So in this case, we're going to lock in a price, and we'll say that we want both a weekday and a weekend price. Click save, and we're on our way.
Great. So again, we saw a bunch of different things we can do there. We can select a day or a range of days. That range can be as long as you like. We can either increase that series of days by a percentage or decrease it by a percentage as well. We can fully customize and lock those prices in. And you can actually create as many custom rates as you like, right? So with Wheelhouse, we're always going to invite you to make revenue management kind of an interactive pattern with us. We have our automated pricing engine that does our best job to pick up pricing and other demand signals near you, but you're fully in control. Now, let's talk about that, right? Let's talk about automation. So we just walked through an intermediate solution, something that you can do yourself very easily. Should you want to automate with Wheelhouse, one of the many things that you get to automate is the predictive demand model, right? So every night, Wheelhouse has a predictive local demand model that evaluates prices at every property near you. And by doing this, we're able to detect price changes and to translate those price signals, those price changes into signals for how we should price your home, right? So it's a very powerful means to look at every single listing near you on a nightly basis and to automate how we're adjusting around those changes. So what we're going to step through now is a quick kind of back, this is the data science section of Wheelhouse, and we're going to show you how one of our pricing models works, one of our local demand models works. There are actually a number of local demand models we're going to look at through this presentation, but let's watch this video and we'll see the first one, predictive local demand.
So we're going to show you some of the behind the scenes work that Wheelhouse does to make sure you're priced perfectly every single night. So I'm stepping into a real listing analysis. This is a real link listing to Wheelhouse. And what I'm looking at here is I'm just going to look at the predictive demand. So what you can see, Wheelhouse's predictive demand model runs every single day. And we basically look at pricing near your property. We look at hotel signal and your competitive set and other places near you. And we're making predictions based on that pricing signal about how your place should price. Now, we're going to show you some other demand charts in a minute here. But what we also can see is that our predictive demand model can actually isolate all the different factors related to your calendar, which means we can show you seasonality, temporality, we could show you just your local events. But all of this behind the scenes is the work we do to make sure that you're priced perfectly every single night and that you're not getting booked before you know an event near you is occurring.
Great. Now, that is the first, again, of the different models that we're going to take a look at in the data science section. And over the course of this year, we're actually going to be bringing all of those models from the back end, from our data science section, out to you. So you'll be able to play around with them and use them as well. But in the meantime, we want to show you how much work we're doing behind the scenes to make sure you're perfectly priced. Now, to the expert solve. Let's say you wanted to learn just a little bit more about how the predictive demand model is working for you. Well, we make all that information available on our blog. You can go to this domain here, usewheelhouse.com/blog/predictive demand model, and we will actually tell you a whole lot more about how that aspect of our pricing engine works.